It's my pleasure to speak to you for Ohr Somayach again this year. And what I'd like to do in honor of Pesach is explore a very basic theme. I think we've had occasion in the past to relate to this theme in various ways in the course of the various festivals. But let's think about this theme in terms of Pesach and see if we can derive a message and a mode, if you like, for entering Pesach, for experiencing the Seder, to transmitting to our children a fundamental message, a basic, inspiring message, but a serious message too. Pesach is the beginning of the year. We have two beginnings of the year. We have Rosh Hashanah, which is the beginning of the year from the point of view of the individual, birth of the human being, so to speak, universal, not necessarily particularly Jewish. And then we have the birth of the Jewish people, which is Pesach. Different experience, unique experience, an explosion in history where the Jewish people burst onto the scene, so to speak, as a nation. And that is the fundamental celebration of the birthday of the unique nation of Israel. But what's often not appreciated is that explosion is followed by a difficult period. Perhaps the easiest way to see this is that you have Pesach, which is Nisan, and then you have Iyar, which is the counting of the Omer. Pesach is an exhilarating time, a time of explosive educational potential. But then we enter the period of the Omer, which is a difficult time, day-by-day counting, a time of semi-mourning, great seriousness, a time of suffering and tragedy in Jewish history. And that bears thought. What is the meaning of this pattern that begins with an uplift and an inspiration and then leads to a period of difficulty, climaxed by a third phase, which we call Sinai, the Jewish people's meeting with God, with Hashem at Sinai? What is this pattern illustrating, and how do we transmit this to our children in a life message that will guide them through the rest of their lives? Let's take a step back for a moment and explore this theme at its root. If you look in the Eitz Chaim, the great Kabbalistic work, perhaps the ultimate commentary on the Zohar, you see that the world begins in two lights, with two lights. After all, we know that creation begins with the Yehi Or, let there be light. But we have a notion that the world begins created with two lights. The first light is perfect. Again, this is very abstract Kabbalistic teaching, if you will. But the deeper wisdom always contains the principles. And it's always the fundamental principles that are the most important and the most potently educational. The first light is perfect. It needs to be perfect because it opens a sphere or a place where there's no place before. But that light never leaves. That light never remains, always leaves. We wish it would never leave, but it does. The first light disappears and it leaves an aching, longing emptiness, a darkness, with a wistful longing for the light that was there once before. And that longing, that emptiness, that loneliness, that darkness brings in a second light. The second light is nothing compared to the first. The first is brilliant in its illumination. And it needs to be, because it needs to open all the space and all the potential. But as soon as it's done its work, it leaves. The second light is very dim compared to the first, but it's one that remains. Now, this is a very abstract teaching. What does it mean? Let's bring it down one level. All experience in life begins with potential, which then gives way to the actual. When you wake up in the morning, let's say you're on vacation, and you wake up in the morning, you have an explosion of potential. You could do anything today. You could climb the mountain, canoe in the lake, swim in the river, ride the horses. At least you could do one of those things. You can't do all of them, but you have the sensation of potential, and it's perfect. Nothing's gone wrong yet. What happens at the end of the day when you collapse exhausted after doing perhaps one of those? All the rest have gone. The potential has been spent to have the actual. Let's take another example. A large sum of money, tremendous potential. You can't eat the money. You can't use the money directly, but it represents tremendous potential. You could buy many things with that money. Not all of them, but some of many things. Perhaps only one of many things. When you spent the money, what are you left with? You're left with the object. You're left with a possession that's real, perhaps something you can eat, but the money's gone. So potential is always unlimited, and it's always perfect. But potential has to be sacrificed in order to have the real. An immature mind values the potential, the exhilaration of what could be, all the expanded wannabes. But those have to be given up. In the moment of conception of a child, they're all possibilities, but when the child is born, you have only that one. The seed may be given by the billion, but the reality is only one. That's the pattern of life. All phases of life fit into this one way or another. The first phase of life, which is youth and childhood, is a phase of tremendous expanded potential, possibilities, a great exhilarating phase of life, but it doesn't last. It gives way to a reality which is often very limited. How do we look at that? How do we look at that transition from one phase to another? You know, in the non-Jewish world, in the secular world around us, the image of youth is always springtime and summer. In the literature of the world, springtime, summer, that's youth. And old age is winter, where the juices are frozen, no more potential, no more growth. Very sad view of life. But in Judaism, in Torah, we have exactly the opposite view. King Solomon, Shlomo Melech, talks about Yemei Chorfi, the days of my winter, the days of my youth. Exact opposite pattern. Why? Because winter is where they break the frozen ground and put the seeds in. And summer is when you reap the crop. It is true that there's no more growth at this point, but you reap the crop. A Jewish vision of life is that youth is indeed an exhilarating moment, but it's also a phase of tension and anxiety. Nothing's real yet. And old age, true that there's no more potential. What can a very old person do? Perhaps turn his chair a little closer to the sun. But on the other hand, he's done what he needs to do. He's built his life, this individual. He or she has built a family, mitzvahs, achievement. So there's the relishing of the actuality that the potential was paid to achieve. Those are the two phases. What does this have to do with Pesach? Pesach is phase one. Pesach is that blaze of miracles, that crescendo of miracles, if you like. You know, the Maharal puts it very, very potently. Others talk about this as well. Maharal points out that the makos, the plagues in Egypt, proceeded in reverse order of the sayings of creation. Right? It's not just a list. They were an escalating process. The first of the plagues, where the experience began, reaches a peak on that miraculous midnight when Hashem appears himself in Egypt. But these proceed in reverse order of the 10 sayings of creation. 10 statements of creation. First of all, let there be light. And then 10 others. And finally, that fulfillment of creation with the 10th of the statements. But Pesach reverses them. And the reason is this: when you build a construction, you build a structure, you begin with the infinitesimal center, dimensionless center, and you put layers around that, the 10 so-called Kabbalistic emanations or layers. But when you peel away the layers, because the Egyptians had so contaminated, made so toxic all 10 layers of reality that they needed to be peeled away from the outside in like the layers of an onion to reach the pure core. And so the plagues in detoxifying and correcting all the damage that the Egyptians had done to the spiritual world reverses the process. So what's the first statement of creation? In the beginning, pure beginning. What's the last of the makos, the last of the plagues? Destruction of the firstborn, immoral and wrong sort of beginning. Correction of that. What's the second statement of creation? Yehi Or, let there be light. What's the second last of the plagues? Plague of darkness, extinguishing. The Maharal works through all 10 of these, and it's fascinating to go through the process, a very highly recommended exercise to prepare for the Pesach Seder. But the meaning of this is that when you reach that incredible midnight when the firstborn are destroyed, you've reached back to the moment of creation. Think about it this way. What existed at the moment of creation, the very first of the statements of creation? Hashem himself in his pristine, isolated existence. Nothing else around him, no intermediaries yet. And what happens in that midnight when the firstborn are destroyed? We reach back to an equivalent existence. Ani v'lo malach, ani v'lo saraf, ani v'lo shliach. I myself alone. You've reached back to the same potency as that moment of creation represents. It doesn't get better than that, it would seem. And yet, it does get better. 7 days later, when the Jewish people stand at the sea and the sea splits, they see more. The lowliest of the Jewish people there saw more than the highest prophet ever saw. So you're talking about a tremendous exponential escalation of human enlightenment and human awareness. And then the surprise. Then they're dropped in the desert. Desert always means a zone of death forces. Desert always is a place in the physical world of no life, but in the spiritual world, a place of darkness and trial. Let's not forget the Jewish people spent the best part of 40 years in the desert and were faced with 10 difficult ordeals and failed all of them. So you're talking about a death zone. So here's the pattern. First, tremendous uplift. Jewish people lifted beyond imagination. And then at the point of peak experience, dropped into a desert to do it on their own. That's the pattern of life. First, it's demonstrated for you. Hashem uplifts you miraculously, no earning, no work. Jewish people sit back and watch the show, so to speak. But when you get the message, then Hashem says to you, then God says to you, get the message? Now do it yourself. Now you take each painful, measured step until we meet at Sinai, but then we meet as equals, because you will have lived the inspiration that I gave you, and then you will have lived the work that you've done yourself. And that's the purpose and the pattern of life. So Pesach means a leaping over. The word literally, Pesach, means to leap over. On the first night of Pesach, you can leap to the 50th level of inspiration. You can have whatever you want on the first night. No protection needed. We don't say the verses of protection. We leave our doors unlocked. It's a night of miraculous experience. When we say Manish Dana, why is this night different than other nights? The answer is it's not even a night. It's a night that's a day. It doesn't qualify even for being a night. It is so illuminated that it's beyond human capacity. But then when you get the message and you charge the batteries and you feel the illumination, then you walk through the darkness shining a light yourself. Then you can meet at Sinai. You know, Pesach takes place in Nisan. Nisan really should have been Nitzan. That indicates the sprouting of spring. But Nisan emphasizes the element of miracles. Nisan means the miraculous. And the zodiac of Nisan is the sheep. That's the passive animal that simply follows. Lechtech acharai bamidbar. You followed me into the desert. So it's an animal with no willful strength of its own. Simply follows. And therefore it's a guaranteed experience. You follow the leader. But then the next month is in the desert, is Iyar. And that's the month of the bull. The bull is not a passive animal that follows. It's a single individual animal that develops its own willful strength. Complete opposite quality. First, it's all done for you. You simply follow. Then you have to forge the path yourself. And the third month, Sivan, the giving of the Torah, Gemini, Ta'imim, perfect harmony between the two. The two tablets of the law, Moshe and Aaron, Hashem and us, the written law and the oral law, all the dualities coming together in perfect harmony. And that, once again, is the pattern of life. First is Pesach, which is unbelievable inspiration, a charging of the batteries, a reaching a voltage that's unprecedented. And then the work is to count one painful and difficult day after another. No leaping to the 50th level for free. Fly now, pay later. That's the message. And so Pesach is a walking through the desert and of acquiring of each difficult and painful step. And isn't that what life's about? Life begins with the inspiration of childhood and youth, where everything is perfect. Everything seems perfect. The world is larger than life for a child and a teenager. But when you're no longer 15 years old, but rather 25 and 35 and 45 and 50, the world closes in on you. And people think, what has happened? Why can I not love so richly? And where are the emotions that were so rich when I was 15 and 16 and 17? The answer is, now you have to make them. And all life experiences like that. The father teaches his child to walk. He lifts up the little child by the hands. Child stands on his feet. What an exhilarating moment. He's standing. He takes his first step and he can't fall because his Abba's holding his hands. But at that moment of thrill and inspiration, Abba, let's go. Then the child there stands there frightened and alone, abandoned by the one who put him in that situation. But that's when he learns to walk. And only when he takes that first frightened and lonely step on his own, then he can run into his father's arms and realize that when his father let go, he was showing more love than when he held his hands. That's the pattern of life. How did you learn to ride a bicycle? You rode along with your father holding the saddle. It was very cool. And then sooner or later you looked back and you saw he wasn't holding it. Ah! But that's when you learned to ride. It must be given to you for free in the beginning. Otherwise you'd have no idea what's meant. You have to hear that music played by an expert to be moved. Then you sit down and start trying to play it yourself. And that's where the trouble begins. But that's when you become real. And all of life represents that duality. So when it comes to Pesach, the national birth of the Jewish people, the purpose of Pesach is to give children that inspiration. It's an explosion of educational experience where children should be so fired with that notion that the rest of the year they fly through the Jewish experience, and the rest of their lives they fly with the potency of the education that they received on this night. But it won't last forever. And part of the education is reminding them that Pesach will be followed by the Omer. The inspiration of leaping to the 50th level will then have to hang on with your teeth and nails to make it real. Given for free, to be sure, absolutely. But on the other hand, after that, needs to be acquired. You see the same pattern with the birth of an individual. The child in the womb is taught the whole Torah for free, doesn't do any work to acquire it. An angel teaches the child the whole Torah, sees from one end of the world to the other, there's a light lit above his head, has all spiritual wisdom and revelation, knows the whole Torah. This applies to all humans, Jews, non-Jews, converts. And then the child is born after receiving a sharp blow, a cruel blow, seemingly cruel blow, that makes the child forget the whole Torah. Now, why would Hashem organize life in such a way that a child is taught the whole Torah only to be made to forget it? The answer is it's not forgotten. It's driven deep into the subconscious. And then the rest of life, of course, is walking through life's desert, evoking and bringing out the wisdom that was once there. This is why when you learn something spiritually true, you don't have a sense of learning, you have a sense of recognition. I know that's true. How do you know it's true? Because good education, good educational experience is simply resonating with an innate wisdom and bringing it out. The wrong sort of education is indoctrination, where the teacher puts in information. The right sort of education is education. The Latin root means to draw out. In the Talmud, when the disciples ask the master a question, he doesn't answer. He says, "What do you think?" A good teacher draws out the innate wisdom. It is there. You have all the wisdom you'll ever need. Torah learning is an experience in evoking, causing a resonance, bringing out an original depth of wisdom. And therefore you know it's true. And when you learn your own Torah, that which appeals to you uniquely, when you walk your unique path, there's a deeper resonance and the music is clearer. So the individual mirrors the same pattern, just as the Jewish people are born in a blaze of inspiration and then must work to acquire it. The individual also, birth is preceded by a phase of inspiration, and then life becomes difficult and a seeking for what was once lost. You know, we said that when the first light leaves, it leaves an aching longing for the light. The reason you seek spiritual wisdom is because you're longing for it, and you only long for something that you once had. You couldn't long for something that has nothing to do with you. The reason you long for something is that it was once part of you, and you feel that aching emptiness, that intimation of spirituality that you know ought to be there. This, incidentally, is the same reason that a person longs to marry. The Talmud tells us that before birth, husband and wife are fused into one, a back-to-back fusion of male and female. Then they're torn apart and brought to the world to find each other in a face-to-face relationship that they build. The reason you long to marry is because you're looking for the part of yourself that was once your completion. And that's why you long for it. You long for it because it was once part of you. And it's no accident that Torah is called a marriage partner. We're also longing for that marital partner, which is Torah. And of course, the Exodus from Egypt is exactly the same message. It's a seeking of Torah. It's an explosion of spiritual wisdom, which we then acquire. We then enter the phase of learning Torah and preparing ourselves for it. So we meet at Sinai to experience Torah in that way. So the individual follows the same pattern. And after birth, the same thing happens again. Let alone the experience before birth. A child, as we said before, experiences tremendous sense of potential. But then life, as I said, closes in, and it must be acquired. So this happens on a national level with the birth of the Jewish people. It happens on an individual level with the birth of a child. And all life fits into these phases. Think about Jewish history. We have two phases. We have the phase of the prophetic, the revealed. We call that the phase of Torah Shebiksav, lasts until 2,300 years ago. And then we enter the phase of the oral law, where we do it ourselves. What is the greatness of Torah Shebaal Peh? We thrash it out for ourselves. True, we always hark back to the inspiration of the written. We don't make it up as we go along. We derive it. We go back to that original charge, that inspiration, that knowledge as a people of the brilliance of former generations. But prophecy is no longer. For more than 2,000 years, we haven't heard the voice of prophecy, and we haven't seen revealed and open miracles. To be sure, we see hidden miracles, but we don't see the revealed miracles of the dead being revived and manna falling from heaven and ocean splitting. But we march through history on the energy of those phases of inspiration. As we trudge through the deserts of history, Midbar Ha'amim, as the Ramban puts it, clutching that Sefer Torah to our chest, marching through the deserts of genocidal attacks and the tragedies and the traumas and the triumphs of Jewish history. Right? We are marching through a desert that began with a phase of inspiration, and it will end with a phase of permanent inspiration, but only because we've earned it by then. And so this is the pattern of life. Phase one, those of you who have experienced the so-called Baal Tshuva experience, people raised, not particularly religious, not knowledgeable, and discover their Torah. Amazing experience. And the Baal Tshuva will tell you of the phase of inspiration and excitement and discovery and enlightenment. Very, very moving, but it doesn't last. That experience never lasts. It always gives way. Who knows better than Ohr Somayach? This pattern of people, young people, hundreds, thousands coming in and being inspired, discovering Torah, learning how to learn. But learning how to learn is very difficult. I'll never forget the experience of a young Baal Tshuva of a couple of years' duration, standing at a wedding in Yerushalayim many years ago, standing next to a Rosh Yeshiva, a famous Rosh Kollel in a big yeshiva in Israel, who himself was a Baal Tshuva 30 years before. And he looked down at this student and he said to him, "How's it going?" And the student said, "Rabbi, when I became involved originally, it was so inspiring. Every line of Gemara that I learned, every Torah idea was breathtaking. And now I'm sitting day after day trying to make progress in my learning. It's very difficult. The rabbi said to him, I see you're in phase 2. That's the pattern. That's the pattern. Marriage, as we said before, and marriage in the course of a marriage has the same. We call it romance, which is phase 1. That doesn't last. Romance is a exhilaration, which is necessary, but essentially it's a gift. That's why, as Rav Dessler used to point out, we don't even have a word for it in Hebrew. And what does romance give way to? Very soon gives way to a phase of work. Right? No couple lives in the same romantic haze of blissful unreality, shall I say, for the rest of their lives. And what happens is that gives way to a phase of work and giving. And as we all know, the word ahava in Hebrew, which is to love, is based on hav, which means to give, as Dessler so famously teaches. And therefore, real love is the result of giving, not the result of getting. Our children are taught that when they're made to feel good, they love. But that's not true. That's called self-love. And therefore, a marriage is an experience of exhilarating chemical infatuation, shall we say, which is necessary and has its own value. But it needs to be revisited as you walk through the long years. Dare we call them the desert years of marriage. As one moves through those years, one needs to celebrate anniversaries. That's a going back to remind oneself of the moment of inspiration and to reawaken the chemistry and the magic. That has to be done. That is what deepens the experience and turns romance into love. And that's the story of the Jewish people's marriage with Hashem. We begin in a romantic blaze of ecstasy when we see His presence absolutely clearly, but that only guarantees that there'll be a walk through the desert. And therefore, phase 2 will be a walking through the desert, and we have to keep that love alive by the experience of anniversaries. What are the Jewish anniversaries of our marriage? That's every year when we celebrate Pesach and the weeks that take us to Shavuos. That's exactly what it is. We're reliving the chemistry and we're sharing that with our children. We're transmitting that phase of inspiration. We're charging the batteries. And then what we're doing is we're living that one day, the one festival of an ecstatic anniversary experience to reawaken the excitement, to reawaken the love. And then we engage the desert again and we walk through it but at a higher level. It's not really a circle, it's really a spiral of increasing maturity and increasing enlightenment. And that is, I would say, a brief summary of the nature of Pesach as a phase 1 experience, right? And then we move through the year through the Omer, which is phase 2, and we plod each, hopefully, rewarding step, rewarding because it's work and not because it's a free ride. And then we arrive at a Sinai, which is a marital experience. It is an ultimate experience. It is the experience of two meeting each other, both having, so to speak, earned or worked or built that experience. And that is really the pattern. And therefore, when you sit at the Pesach Seder, there are really two things to bear in mind. One is charging the batteries, feeling that inspiration, exciting the children and the child in us. And the second is to bear in mind that this will be a light that we'll have to carry with us through the darkness. I'll leave you with this thought. Rambam says it classically. In the classic work of Moreh Nevuchim, Guide for the Perplexed, the Rambam says life is like standing on a dark plain on a stormy night. You stand there beaten by the rain, lashed by the wind, hopelessly lost, almost despairing. And at the point of greatest darkness, suddenly there's an unexpected flash of lightning. And in that moment you see the road clearer than by day. And as you see it, the light disappears. And the rest of the night you walk through the storm on memory alone of a flash of light that you once saw. Rambam says some people see more flashes and some people see less, but no one walks in the light. And therefore, that is the pattern of life. We cannot expect a permanent illumination. That's not the point of life. The point of life is not for Hashem to demonstrate what He is and what He can do. The point is for Him to inspire us and then set us off on our own journey. So Pesach is the beginning of that journey, and we engage it, we relish the inspiration, we charge the batteries so that we can walk through the long phase of history and the long phase of the deserts of our own lives to reach our own personal and national Sinai.
Hi, this is Peretz Baruch Eichler, a proud alumnus of Ohr Somayach. Now what you just watched is one of the many programs that Ohr Somayach provides, leaving its impact on hundreds of thousands with so many more waiting to be reached. Ohr Somayach's central campus in Jerusalem has over 300 students presently learning there. And now you can be a vital part of spreading that bounty of knowledge worldwide by logging on to donate.ohr.edu. We can step up to the plate at this pivotal moment of Ohr Somayach's growth and bring the next generation of Jews home.